Hello, humans, and welcome to another episode of Gen X Gamer, and let's defend the N64 controller. That's right, so many people have been besmirching its name, its legacy for the longest time, and it's something that's always bothered me, and I wanted to talk to you guys about that. I hope you're doing well out there. This is probably the last recording I'll make in this condo that I'm at right now, and I'll make some more probably as I'm traveling along the Philippines, and hopefully we'll get home here pretty soon. But I wanted to talk to you about really this controller that has been maligned for years, right? It's like every few years, the N64 controller hater crowd comes out there, and they're always dragging it through the mud, right? Claiming that it's one of the worst controls in history, that everybody laughed at it. Memes have been done about it that I've seen over the years. That you needed 3 hands to use it and crap like that. And people claim that it was poorly designed. And I think they make a mistake because a lot of them are looking at this controller through the eyes of modern gaming. As a matter of fact, most people that write these things weren't even around back in 1996. They hadn't even been born. Or maybe they were born in 1991, right? They were like 5 years old when when this console came out. But, they don't take it for what it is, for the piece of engineering that it was for its time. Let me ask you, if 3D gaming didn't exist at the time, what was a controller supposed to look like? Right? Nintendo wasn't copying anybody at that point, right? They weren't the company, the miserable company they are today. They were an innovative company. They're trying to make something new. And those of us who lived it, right, who purchased it, and many of us, let me tell you guys, many of us purchased the controller before we had the console because the console was sold out. So we bought an extra controller ahead of time. I know I'm not the only one. You old-timers out there can back me up on this. But I think that judging this controller, out of context, at least in the context of time, and claiming that it was a failure is completely incorrect. It was groundbreaking. It was a groundbreaking piece of engineering, for those of us who made that leap and right into 3D worlds, right? In 1996, gaming was really transforming, right? It was going from a 2D environment to full 3D, polygonal environments. It wasn't just a visual upgrade. It was really a shift in technology. Suddenly, you could play more than just jumping left and right. You can go up and down, sideways. You're moving in 3 dimensions, and you can control a camera. Things that you could never do before. Before the N64, most controllers followed the Super Nintendo template of the D-pad. That's really what it was, variations of the same thing. Shoulder buttons. And they were great for side scrollers. I mean, to me, the Sega controllers are great. Specifically the Sega Saturn controller. But when Super Mario 64 came out, and you went into that open castle courtyard, there was nothing like it. Introducing that analog stick, in the center design. It really became the standard for 3D movement at the time. And for those of us who enjoyed Mario the very first time, we got those feelings back again. I mean, we were in this game for hours and hours trying to find everything out and moving freely. It was amazing. It was Mario in 3D. And I think that people do a disservice, through, as the decades go by, all these years have gone by. What is it, 31 years now, probably? And without it, platformers, shooters, adventure games, the way we know them today wouldn't be the same. They wouldn't be the same, right? And yes, it did have 3 grips. That's the elephant in the room, right? But it wasn't a mistake, and famously, in the Nintendo videos where they show their legacy, they show how they actually broke off pieces of that controller to make the Wii controllers, right? But it was a way of giving developers the flexibility at that time, right? During this transition period. Some games still use the D-pad, and a lot of it you know, came from that people wanted to play old games, you know, using that controller, and it was a little bit harder. It was. But the controller was specifically designed for this new technology, right? For the Mario 64s, for the wave racers out there, you know, and the other sides, you know, were basically hybrid layouts, you know. So rather than using force like everybody else did on the other old controllers, the controller let you pick up like left and middle grip, or, you know, switch sides. And, you know, of course, people mock it now, you know, because no later controller copied it. Of course, it was the only one. Because after that, you know, the designs evolved. But that's where it started. You have to start off somewhere, you know, and that was the first time we ever had this transitional design, that we were going into these 3D worlds. And remember, the analog stick was the first of its kind, right? It's really easy to forget now, but that stick in 1996 was groundbreaking. Yeah, Nintendo engineered something. I think it had an optical sensor, detected minute angles of movement. It translated into smooth motion. I mean, it was something to see back in the day, right? It was different, huge difference, night and day, right, from what we had before. Mario could tiptoe, you could walk, sprint, depending on how far you pushed it. The level of precision on that stick was far beyond anything that we had before. You know, Sony followed after, right, with the dual analog sticks, then the DualShock, but they didn't invent the idea. That's what people forget, right? They didn't come up with it first. Nintendo did. Nintendo broke the ground, just like the NES standardized the D-pad. The N64 standardized the analog sticks. You know, every Xbox, PlayStation, Switch controller since has owed its existence, right, to that wobbly gray stick from back in the year. But if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't have had it. You know what else? You know, you had that Z trigger, right? A gun in your hands. Another innovation people forget about is the Z trigger. You know, back in the middle of the grip. And it wasn't like shoulder buttons, right? The Z trigger felt like a trigger on a gun, you know, and it was awesome. Without it, GoldenEye 007 wouldn't have felt nearly as good. You know, and we're talking about games that we love. GoldenEye, N64. I mean, these are staples that we talk about today in the retro community, and I don't know why people really crap on the stick. And if you look at the re-release that Nintendo did, man, when I bought that Nintendo 64, I had people wanting to buy it off of me. They were going for crazy off eBay because people still wanted that experience. They had that nostalgia because it was that good back then, right? It set the precedent for modern controllers, and that's what people forget. People have short memories, you know? And people forget about the plug-in power, the rumble, right? That expansion slot in the back, the controller introduced yet more things for the first time. You had that controller pack. You could save games. More importantly, the rumble pack, you know, like with Star Fox 64 was awesome. You know, it blew your mind back then that you were getting that kind of action. You know, and it was just a plastic shell. It reacted to the game. You know, it just gave you a new immersion. And I know it seems, you know, today, you know, today's technology seems like nothing, right? But back then, it was the experience of the time. So, you know, it's easy to dismiss this controller now, holding up to the, you know, new controllers, whether the Xbox Series X or the latest PlayStation. But in 1996, you know, this controller wasn't weird. It was freaking magical, man. So many days, so many nights we spent with this controller playing Mario, doing 360-degree movements, stuff that we could never do before. You know, and to judge it by today's standards, I think it's a mistake. Yeah, you know, the plastic stick eventually broke and stuff like that. But, you know, that analog stick, along with the Z trigger, man, they were game changers, and people forget about that. You know, and it's just not guys, it's not just nostalgia on my part, right? The N64 controller wasn't perfect, right? But it was the legacy of the analog stick and the other things that it did right, and the movements in the 3D controlled environments, that made it so precise. It gave us rumble feedback, right? We had triggers, and it was that bridge between one area of gaming and another, one era of gaming and another, right? From 2D to 3D. And nobody knew what a controller was supposed to look like. And this is what Nintendo came up with. And some things that it got very right. And the reason we know that they got it right is because we use some of those things today. What do you guys think? Right? Am I wrong? Am I just looking through nostalgia lenses here? I think the Nintendo 64 controller deserves a better rap. I think it's underrated for the things that it did, and absolutely it deserves a better place in history because it was a first in many ways. All right, humans, thank you for stopping by. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.